Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I am a research analyst here at workforce.com. And today we are going to talk a little bit about how to stop an employee turnover of hourly staff. So today we have on Chris M. King back by popular demand. Chris is an executive advisor at Status Flow. Chris, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Love being here. Thanks for having me again.
Awesome. Of course, of course. And we also have Bo Gersnachi as our organizational specialist at workforce.com. Bo, as always, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for keeping me busy.
Of course, anytime. So pretty much to give a quick run through of our Big Marker webinar software that we have here. On the right, we have a chat box. We don't have any formal Q&A session at the end, so we just highly encourage everybody to drop their questions in the chat to get everyone acquainted. How about we drop in where we're all dialing in from? So I'm gonna type in right here. I would love to hear from everybody. And then while everyone's kind of getting acquainted with that, we do have Andrew Lewis, who said hello at the very beginning. He is our video producer behind the scenes. So if you have any technical problems, feel free to just tag at Andrew and he'll be sure to help you out, whether audio, visual, whatever it is. Cool, awesome, this is great. Hello, everybody. Awesome, awesome. Missouri, okay, awesome. Arkansas, cool. All right, so we also have a couple poll questions throughout the webinar. So those will just come up right on the bottom left of your screen. It's going to range from short response, multiple choice. And again, it's just a really good way for us to engage with you all, see where everyone's head's at. At the end, we do have an audit for everybody. So this will just help measure your organization's mitigation of turnover and quit rates. And then finally, for those who are SHRM members or trying to get recertified, we do have a PDC credit if you remain for the full webinar. So if you're a member of SHRM, someone from the team will reach out to you if you stay for the full hour with your PDC ID to help in your recertification process. And then finally, to give a little bit of background of workforce.com, we are a workforce management software company who specializes in scheduling and time and attendance. Our overarching goal is really just to help business leaders and frontline managers make the best decisions for their company. Cool. And then to get things started, this is a Q&A style. We love to just be able to pick everyone's brain here. So first and foremost, Chris, what can you tell me about some of the companies you've worked with and your experience with turnover in the hourly wage industries?
Well, it flexes wildly depending on industry. You know, at the Status Flow, we are not industry. We are industry agnostic. So we see kind of pretty much everything. We've done a lot in healthcare. We've done some in broadcasting and some B2C companies, cosmetics, actually.
Awesome. Great. But I'd love to kind of hear about some of the companies that you've worked with, specifically those in the hourly waged.
Yeah, they love to share this. And I think the thing about it is how different they all are, right? Mm-hmm. You know, hourly, I mean, if you're talking about something like fast foods, for example, you're going to see a lot of similarity. But I think in other industries, it's very different industry to industry. So I think what you're looking for is something very specific to the company that you're in, to the industry that you're in when you're dealing with these kinds of issues.
Got it. Bo, what about you?
Yeah, I would piggyback on what Chris was sharing. Workforce.com, as a workforce management software, we're pretty interested in working with anyone with employees, which should be, the vast majority of businesses. But their experiences with hourly staff definitely vary according to industry. Some people anticipating turnover, others, preventing it to the greatest degree possible. So it's kind of just dependent on the industry and what you do.
Definitely. We got a poll question kicking us off strong. So we asked, what industry do you work in? We love to hear from you guys. A lot of people are saying healthcare, a good amount of casinos, which is really cool. Some hospitality thrown in there, manufacturing. So this is something that will be really interesting to kind of touch on the differences there and seeing if there is some true preventative measures with turnover, depending on what industry you work in. So going on to, Chris, have you found any certain industries to have higher turnover rates than others? What's your experience there?
Well, because we work across such a broad range of industries, we don't spend a lot of time in one specifically. So, the short answer is no, we don't really see that. So for us, again, it really just depends on the organization that we're dealing with.
Yep. Bo, have you seen any, kind of trends with specific industries, anything like that?
Yeah, especially in the last about month to 2 months, since the economy's kind of been taking a little bit of a downturn and inflation's been getting higher. I think the industries that have very small margins, probably more focused in on staffing or hospitality relating to like delivery services and things like that. I've seen a lot of decrease in spending there, which is immediately impactful for their bottom line. So I think
Got
people
it.
are kind of taking back the discretionary income spending, and so it's hitting a lot of very tight margined companies right now.
I found this, I'm just really quickly going to share this really great graph right here that, it's a couple years old, right? But it's still, I think, really reflective on the amount of employee turnover, obviously by industry. And 2020 has shot up dramatically across the board, right? So kind of taking in what Chris was saying, and it is something where you see a lot of the same amount of turnover, but at the same time it's even throughout. Everyone's getting surpassed 2020, and I'm sure 2021 and 2022 are showing very similar metrics. I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on this graph, specifically for those in hospitality, which are kind of those last three right there.
Well, hospitality and healthcare have a lot of similarities in terms of the way they operate. In fact, even some hospitals will call their patients and we'll call them guests. So I think you're probably going to see there are similar things you can do if you're in healthcare or in hospitality. Look at what the other one is doing and see what's working. One of the things in healthcare that's particularly interesting is that patient satisfaction scores are very high. Or having high patient satisfaction scores is very important. And that has nothing to do with clinical care, right? And so there can be a lot of pressure on the staff to provide a very good patient experience outside of clinical care, right?
Interesting. But I don't know if you had any thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, I think on top of that pressure, there's also, particularly in the food service industries, there's an added pressure to meet your own personal bottom line that's probably impacting the turnover rates in economically difficult times, given the reliance on tips. If there's not as many sales, it may not necessarily be impacting your hourly rate at all, but it will be impacting the amount of money you're taking in. And if you're no longer meeting your minimum income that you need, then you're probably looking for other jobs.
Yep. Very true. Chris, how has turnover rate increased over the past couple of years? Not even just taking in what we're seeing here, but what are some trends that you've been seeing?
Well, I think emotional regulation is going to play a big role, and just general instability across. Obviously, the last 2-3 years have been pretty tumultuous, and it's created a big stir. And people may not even necessarily know what is going on with them underneath the surface. They might be edgy or upset or whatever, and they might direct it out in the workplace, because work can be a very frustrating place from time to time, right? We have that, we have some friction. And so I think the tendency, because of something that is going on outside of work, may be brought in and it gets projected into the work environment. It seems like the problem is work when it's maybe all the other stuff that's been going on. It's frustration at home. It's what's been going on with the pandemic. It's, like there's a lot happening right now. And so the question is, where is the source of my irritation? Is it really here in the workplace?
That's very interesting. We actually had a poll question, again, for everybody, asking, do you measure your turnover rate? A lot of people, over 60%, are saying yes, they do actually measure it. Some people say, no, we have no idea. And others are saying we have some idea, but no hard number, no hard metric on it. Bo, I'm curious, being someone that works a lot with kind of the metrics behind these things, what would you say to those who don't have it or kind of are tiptoeing around being able to obtain that data?
I would say to those who are interested in learning it, I think that it's something that can be a daunting number at first. It's almost like when you have a big purchase, you don't necessarily want to check your checking account right after.
Right.
But if you do, at least you have a better understanding of where you're currently at. And I think there's other statistics that you can bring in, such as getting shift feedback and employee satisfaction, so that when you have your actual turnover number, then you can start to benchmark against something, and then we can test as we try and improve those numbers over time. Are our efforts impacting that bottom line at all? But if we never have a bottom line or a starting point, then it's kind of difficult to understand how we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Chris, why do you think managers and upper management are struggling so much these days to keep staff on board?
Well, I think there's sort of a vicious cycle going on. There's the fear of losing people. And humans are a funny thing. We can be very and beautifully ironic, really, which is why you can track it in the art all the way, back to Shakespeare or whatever. But when you start getting so afraid of the thing, you create the thing because you're putting a lot of energy into it, right? So there's a polarity in terms of energy, right? It's not just what we say or what we do. It's the energy that it rides on. And so if you're in a space where you're afraid to lose people or have that sort of desperate sense about you to keep them, it's going to make it very hard. I remember in high school, the energy of being desperate to date that girl, that was never going to happen because of the desperation, right?
She smelled the desperation.
Right? So there's like a flip in the energy that can happen when it's like, look, we know this is an epic place to work, and you are crazy if you want to leave here.
Right.
The trick is, how do you make your environment, how do you make that true, right?
Interesting.
That's such good insight, Chris.
Well, the work we do has so much to do with energy in it, and it really does happen in a quantum field. Okay, I won't get too nerdy here, but it does have to do with physics. It has to do with subatomic particles, right? But energy is everything. And so if you're in that space of desperation, there's an opportunity to flip the polarity in that, and like, okay, what can we do to make this so cool that people are excited to be here?
Yeah. I think it's such an interesting take for sure on the world of HR that a lot of people don't necessarily take into consideration.
Yeah. So do you think that concept, is it generally, you can apply the same principles across industries, or are there going to be different things that you can do to impact, healthcare versus food service?
I'm going to sound like a lawyer. It depends. It's probably both.
That's a good answer.
I mean, look, here's the thing, right? The idea, if you're going to have a really effective company, you want a staff that is connected, right? Even if they're an hourly employee, do you want, and is it aligned for your organization to have people that are simply punching a time card? Maybe it is, right? In which case, maybe this isn't that big a deal, right? Maybe this is only a perceived problem. Yes, turnover is expensive. Yes, hiring and letting people go is a pain in the butt, right? And, what's the alignment for you? Now, if you want an organization where people aren't going to leave for 25 cents an hour, I mean, maybe you're just okay with letting them go. It's like, look, that's not the kind of person I want here. It's really tough when we're talking about, low end hourly jobs, right? Because that's just going to be the nature of the beast kind of thing. But if you're talking about something in healthcare where you have healthcare workers in the field, like a home health agency or something, when you're talking about something like a radio station, right? I mean, people will line up by the thousands for a radio DJ job that pays barely above, just doesn't even pay a living wage, I mean, so it depends.
Right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's reminded me of a client we had worked with, which was a movie theater, which to my point earlier was they were one of the companies I was referencing that are anticipating turnover. Like they expect it because they're employing a lot of minors, and those minors, they only keep those jobs for so long, or their summer jobs, things like that, and see a lot of that in the industry. And so their focus isn't necessarily on how do we prevent the turnover, but how do we have them have the best experience possible in the moment so that they help with the recruiting process in the future.
Ah, that's really interesting. That's like it's kind of starting from the root of the problem opposed to kind of working from the outside in, if that makes sense.
Right.
You know what, Meredith, you actually struck on a very important point, and it might end up being the most important thing. And so I'm so glad you brought this up. If you have high employee turnover and that's a problem for you, that's not the problem. That's the result of the problem. I mean, think that through for a second, right? If you have a high turnover of employees and it's causing you a lot of problems, that's the result. Of what is that the problem, or of what is that the result, is the question you need to start asking.
Got it. That's a very interesting perspective. I like that. I've been looking at a lot of, different articles and doing a lot of research on this topic, of course. And I've been seeing a lot of differences between voluntary versus involuntary turnover. Chris, can you speak a little more to those 2 points?
Well, define those a little bit for me, because, people have different spins on that.
Yeah, definitely. So from what I gather, voluntary is more in terms of something that the company expects, whereas involuntary is due to outside circumstances. For example, COVID, a lot of furloughs, a lot of layoffs happen there.
I would say, again, this becomes about an energy and awareness thing. People are kind of funny. We will create the reality that we expect or that we focus on. So if you expect there to be turnover, I can pretty much guarantee there will be. Right? It has an impact, right? And look, we can say, here's all the reasons why I expect it, right? But the neocortex is a part of the brain. It's an ongoing calculation of all your history and your experiences, and it uses all that to predict the future. The problem is that in predicting the future, our tendency is to create it.
Interesting. So this is kind of an interesting follow-up question, and we have a lot of HR and ops and mid-management type of personas in the audience right now. Is there anyone to blame for voluntary turnover?
When you say the word blame, it's a slippery slope for us. Blame involves victim mentality, and we don't do that here. I can say this much. Okay, I'll just go. I'll take it down the rabbit hole of neuroscience. Okay, everybody has an operating system in their head. Okay, just like a phone or a computer. We call it a belief system. It's been running since the person was 6 years old, and they are the sole architect of the system. Okay,
right.
So the system in your brain creates every thought that somebody has. The thoughts are experienced as feelings. Feelings drive actions. I know we like to think we're linear, rational people. We're not. Feelings always drive actions. The actions produce results, and the results we produce are unconsciously pre-designed to validate the system that started it all, right? So there's a cybernetic feedback loop running around, which is why I say if you expect something to go a certain way, it probably will, because you're putting your energy into it. And it doesn't matter if you're saying, I don't want turnover. Your energy is still on turnover, right? If I say, don't hesitate to email me, all I've done is told you not to email me.
Right. Interesting. Well, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that necessarily, but
yeah, I think I agree with Chris to an extent. I do think that there are some external variables and impacts that a company can be very uplifting and positive, but at the end of the day, if you're not meeting bottom line, there can and probably will be involuntary turnover. There's also things like funding and things that, when the economy goes down, then funding gets dried up. And if you weren't cash flow positive and you didn't have a good, amount of cash saved up, you don't have the opportunity to retain some of the staff, even if they were good.
Yeah.
And that, the reality of that will negatively impact the culture as well.
Agreed.
Interesting.
I mean, I would look at just on the topic of the expectation thing, look at Patagonia, right? Now, the statistics I'm going to throw out here are probably 5 years old now, but I can't imagine it's changed too much. But Patagonia is an industry where you can expect 13 to 15% turn, I think. And they, at the time that I saw this, were experiencing 3% turn in an industry that's 13 to 15 standard.
Wow.
And it's because of the way that they have oriented their organization. They have put in certain things. They have a completely different kind of culture there. And they don't expect 13 to 15%, right? Because of what they've designed, because they know they're awesome.
Yeah.
Before we even move on, you know, I do want to touch on the idea of culture, right? And Chris, we kind of talked a little bit about this earlier this week on exactly what that means to people. And for those that think culture is, for lack of a better word, bullshit, what do you think for that in terms of, you know, how would they go about implementing a good sense of culture within their community that's their staff?
I love this question because culture is like brand. Everybody thinks they know what it is. And the overwhelming majority, like 95% that we run into, like, you have no idea what your culture is.
Right.
Nietzsche was brilliant in that he said you could identify a culture and see where a society's been and where it's going by the language that they use. And so I was working with a B2C company, and they thought their culture was we're family oriented, we're team, we're communicative, we're all these kinds of things. But listening, you know, working with them over even when we started, just in a very quick sampling of working with them, I presented to the CEO, you have no idea what your culture is. You have an entire staff of yes people with poor boundaries who are steeped in victim mentality. That's your culture.
Wow.
How did he take that?
She,
sorry.
Just teasing you in this hypersensitive world. She was stunned. She was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, look, let me run it down for you. You know, you got your staff working crazy hours. They say yes to everything. Nobody ever tells anybody no. They have no boundaries here because they think they have to. Right? Victim mentality. I have to do this. I can't say no. I can't, like, terrible boundaries. Right? And these are all performance killers. And this is the road to burnout. You will destroy your staff and they will leave. Guaranteed.
Interesting. That's great. That's a really great perspective. In terms of switching it back from turnover rate to quit rate, why is quit rate so important for a company to take into consideration?
Well, I think it's important to understand why.
Yeah.
You know, assuming you can get the information, right? And that's very difficult because if you have a high quit rate, then you probably don't have a culture of psychological safety. If you don't have a culture that involves psychological safety, you're not going to get the information, right? So it's very difficult to really get somebody who is objective and balanced, right? So if they're quitting for another opportunity or whatever, they might just say that. They might not even care to give you the information, or they may be so bent out of shape that they're just sort of dumping on you, not really objective, right? So that's a tricky one, really. I don't know that I have a good answer for that.
No, I think that's a great answer. You kind of spoke a little bit on obtaining that information, right? And Bo, maybe you could speak a little bit more on this, but how does somebody go about, again, obtaining information similar to turnover rate, but quit rate? And I actually have a great slide I'll pull up while you're talking about that.
Yeah, Chris's comment on trust, really, it's interesting. I think it's very valid. Part of trust, I think, is when you open yourself up to be vulnerable by sharing, feedback that's not positive or that, is constructive criticism. How does the company respond to that, I think, matters. So we talk a lot about, like, automating and getting as much feedback as possible in a quick way, so that you can get a stronger, larger picture. But the reality is that, like, if there's information in there that's coming in that is, the source of truth, that is very truthful, someone's going out of their way to, share something because you asked for it and then you're not doing anything about it, or you're not addressing it, then you're definitely, going to see a decrease in the responses or the honesty in, how that information. So, acting on things will help continue to build that trust that the employee is giving you by filling that out, or, talking to you in person.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with Bo, and because we run through a lens of extreme accountability and ownership, and so if you have a high quit rate, in a short amount of time, I'll say anything south of a year, because you're not sure if you're going to get accurate information, I think, okay, well, where's our responsibility here as an organization? So the first thing I'm going to look at for a high quit rate is your hiring process.
Again, starting at the root.
Quitting in a week or a month, right. I don't think they're the problem. I think you screwed up.
You lied to them.
Well, an expectation wasn't managed, but something in the you didn't select the right person. Something you did in the hiring process is probably contributing to this. I'd say almost guaranteed, really.
Jody had a really awesome comment in the chat. She said, stay surveys are a good way to get pulse of your workplace culture. And that's actually something that we do really similar here at Workforce, where we do shift feedback surveys. After each shift, you get a quick survey just to kind of get, again, a pulse check on your culture in the moment, and getting that live data is very much key. Chris, I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on surveying, your employees kind of on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think you absolutely need feedback regularly and quickly. Think about it in this term, like immediate feedback, really. And again, this is going to require a culture of psychological safety, of bidirectional communication. If I'm a mountain biker, right? So if I'm going downhill on a mountain bike and I do something wrong, the bike is going to tell me instantly, right? It's immediate feedback, right? So you have got to have, an organization where somebody can come to you and provide what we'll call bidirectional leadership. Right. Somebody in the lowest ranks of the hierarchy of the organization can go up and say, here's an issue or whatever, and do so in a very safe way, so that they're like, oh my gosh, thank God they told us. Right. This is something that the Navy SEALs do. I train with retired Navy SEALs, and this is just how elite teams work.
That's really interesting. That's some cool insight. In terms of the biggest mistake or misconception when it comes to employee turnover rate, Chris, what do you think that is?
That's a very good question. I don't know that there is a biggest thing. I like to look at where can I have the most impact, right? And it's very tough to have an impact on somebody else as a person or a group, because you really can't control thoughts, feelings, or behaviors in another person. You can only control what you do and watch the results. So I think looking at what can we do in our organization that potentially impacts that.
Got it.
Like the hiring process, for example, that is totally under your control.
Right. Yeah. Starting from the root of it, for sure. But I don't know if you had any thoughts on the matter and kind of what you've seen with some of the companies you've worked with.
Sorry, could you repeat it one more time?
Definitely. So talking about the biggest mistake or misconception when it comes to a company's turnover rate.
Yeah, that's a good one. Misconceptions. I would go back to Chris's example with Patagonia, who is considered a golden standard of limiting turnover, and they're still at 3%.
Are they?
Means or at least in that time period, we're at 3%.
Yeah. Oh, I thought maybe you checked on.
No. So that 3% is still, showcasing the fact that you'll lose people. And so being able to accept reality, I think, in that way, allowing, you don't have to have this infinite control of your workforce. Like you're obviously trying to lower a statistic, but I don't think 0 is a good number to benchmark against.
Yeah, some turnover is natural, but is normal.
Yes.
But I come from the lens that no number is. Right? You're going to have some turnover, and that's going to be normal. But there is no number that is normalized other than you see it regularly out there. That doesn't, you don't have to be normal.
So in that sense, would you consider there to be such thing as an abnormal amount of turnover within an industry?
Yeah, sure. I mean, these are just standard sort of, if it's unusually high, I mean, I would say that Patagonia's is abnormal, right? It's unusually low. So I guess the question is, again, it boils down to alignment. What do you want for your organization? What is going to make your organization the best that it can be? Maybe high turnovers are a good thing because it's, you get new people with fresh perspectives and new ideas. Maybe it's good things. Maybe you are getting so much innovation and creativity out of fresh blood on a regular basis that it offsets the cost of the turnover. And maybe you're actually better for having high turnover. I don't know, right? But you got to take a look at this. But to look through these really narrow lenses of high turnover bad, low turnover good, not necessarily. It's a question of alignment with the outcomes that you want, with the experience that you want to have in the organization, right? Because if Patagonia just said, yeah, it's normal, 13, 15%, we expect that, it's normal, you missed a huge opportunity.
So a follow-up question to that, for those who are kind of trying to stay within that normal line of turnover and not obviously go outside of it where it becomes abnormal, so to speak, what would you say for the biggest mistake that you're seeing people make when they try to stop turnover or stop that abnormal number?
They haven't even asked if that's what they need to do. Biggest mistake. The biggest mistake we see, so the biggest mistakes are the counterintuitive ones. So it says, we got high turnover, we need to change it. Why? Validate that for me first. Well, it's expensive and it's this, that, and the other. Yeah, but what else happens? What else happens with high turnover? Like I mentioned, fresh perspective, new people, whatever, right? Like you got to slow down here. Just because something happens that you didn't expect or don't like doesn't mean it's bad. Right? I'll go back. I said, Hamlet, Act 2, for nothing is either good nor bad. Thinking makes it so. Right? Right? If you like it, it's good. If you don't like it, it's bad. Nothing is anything. Nothing is bad. You don't like it. So that's, for you, it's bad. Nothing is offensive. Right? Again, extreme accountability. I am offended by that. But the thing itself is nothing. Right? So when you look through that lens of accountability and you slow down, and I'll reference my SEAL friends who remind me, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? So stop when they say, we need to do something about this. Let's verify that. Let's validate it. Maybe there's an opportunity here to do something nobody has ever done.
Right.
Maybe we can leverage this somehow. Maybe it's not something that needs to be corrected. Maybe it does. Maybe you're right. You'll probably be right most of the time, but don't expect to be right or you'll just prove your own thinking, right? So have that humility, open up the creative centers of the brain and play that out a little bit. Play in the ridiculous, the fantastic, what in my world we call banana world, right? Where it seems ridiculous and absurd, where somebody says, our turnover is really high. Well, maybe that's a good thing. Play that out. How might that be a good thing? Not in a challenge, but okay, let's look at it, right? Because what that's going to do is, even if you're still going to want to lower the turnover rate, you are now creating a culture of creativity and innovation.
Interesting. So I guess in a sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, in order to, in this case, in this instance that we're kind of explaining, to stop employee turnover of hourly staff, you kind of need to lean into it a little bit. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Lean in.
Yeah. That's interesting. Bo, I don't know if you had any thoughts on, maybe the biggest mistake people make, whether it's impulsiveness or something like that when it comes to stopping turnover.
Yeah, interesting question. Biggest mistake would probably be to just start throwing money at it.
Yeah.
So if
fix
you
the
do,
problem, fix the problem.
yeah, like let's give everyone a gift card.
Right.
I mean, I'll always readily accept your
Right.
gift card, but does that mean I'm going to stay at your job any longer?
Yeah.
Right. Great point. Great point.
And we'll definitely touch a little bit on incentives and, the cost of the issue later on. Speaking of the cost of the issue, Chris, what are some high ticket items when it comes to turnover that people tend to throw money at, so to speak?
Well, historically, I haven't seen this lately, but historically they might do, some kind of, depending on the size of the organization, some trip to an exotic place or something like that. We've seen that. We're going to take the staff to, or maybe at least the leadership team or the department heads. We're going to go to Cancun or, whatever. And yeah, the employee incentives, I don't know how often organizations are checking with the employees to see what would really incentivize them. And we've learned a couple of things. Money is a very short-term cookie. It's like, it's really good, but it doesn't last very long. And,
Right.
and it can actually backfire. It's like, oh, we'll give them more money. Well, if the more money you give them still falls short of expectation, that just blew up in your face, right? So now they're even more upset with you, right?
Right.
So you really got to find out, are we doing the right things? And you got to take this a little bit beyond that, because people start with, are we doing things right? Okay, good question. But now take it a step above that. Are we doing the right things? Now let's take it a step above that. What's the nature of rightness, right? As defined by your organization. I think these are important questions you have to ask, because to Bo's point, you can't just throw money. Here's gift cards. Here's this, here's that, because now you're in that desperation. Please stay. I'll give this for you. I'll give that for you. Giving people more of what they don't want will not help you.
Right. I think the cookie analogy is actually really accurate in the sense that people tend to, sugar being a very highly addictive substance, so to speak. People just want more and more as you kind of keep giving it to them. So whether it's incentives, you start off by giving, hey, you have a free cup of coffee today. Then you get a Starbucks gift card, and then it kind of keeps racking up, and the expectation kind of keeps going higher and higher. And eventually, like Bo said, you're just throwing money at the problem, and your turnover might just look the exact same as it did a couple of months ago. So I think that's a really good analogy.
Well, and thank you. And I would say this much. If you're going to throw money at the problem, you can throw it in one place that I guarantee you will benefit the organization. It may not change your turnover, but it will guaranteed help the organization. So at least you're not throwing money away. And here's how to do it. You spend money on training your leaders, whether they're department heads, whether they're managers or directors, or like whatever level of leader. If somebody's got people underneath them, they're a leader, right? And even in some regards, when people don't have somebody beneath them, they are still leaders in their own lane or whatever. Here's why. People, generally speaking, do not leave jobs. They leave bosses. We know this. So if you put money in investing in your leaders, in your departments, at your people, maybe people stay, maybe they don't. But at least you're still getting benefit out of that. You're getting better leaders, in whatever, whether it's sales training, whether it's emotional intelligence. I would strongly recommend training in the emotional intelligence and that kind of thing, because that's the connection that people need to stay, and we know this. Now, granted, people are still going to leave for that, minimal increase in hourly wage. It's going to happen. We get that. But still, at least you're not throwing money away with Starbucks gift cards that get you nothing.
Right. What are some resources that you mentioned for leadership that people can kind of look to?
That's is a big world out there.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'll tell you.
Top three.
What's that?
Top three.
Okay. I'll tell you one that's really helpful that not many people know about. If you are a for-profit organization and you are doing business in California and you are doing business over state lines, California has a budget. They will give you money, and it's in the $1 billion range. I don't know how much money it is, but it's a surplus of money that every organization, every for-profit organization in California pays like $7 per employee per year.
Wow.
So they pay into this fund, you can apply to get money from that fund to train your staff. They will pay you to train your staff because it's expensive as hell to do business in the state of California. So they want to help offset that cost so that you're a more competitive organization with teams, with companies that are in Nevada or Delaware or wherever they've incorporated, right? So you can be more competitive in the workplace. They will give you money to train your staff. And of course, I know the people that do this. So
that's awesome. So
it's typically not one-off stuff, but if you have ongoing training and you're ongoing investing in your staff, again, whether it's leadership training, sales training, EQ, whatever, however you're training your staff, the state will pay you to do it if you meet the criteria.
I'm looking at Jody Romero. I'm looking at Monica Sanchez. I'm looking at, who else do we have in here from California? John O. Everyone that's from California, you heard it here first. Be sure to reply to that because that's awesome. That's a really great tip.
Yeah, so I can connect you if you want the information, Meredith. I can give it to you here or whatever. But yeah, I can connect you with the people that will support you through. They'll basically do it for you to just send in the applications, all this, and they take a small percentage of it, and you get the balance to train your staff.
That's awesome. That's great. If you guys want more information, feel free to email myself or Chris. Lori had some interesting comments. She said, more money does not fix the terrible work ethic. Again, could not agree more. And said, I used to think it was they leave due to bosses. However, media announcements the past week have noted tremendous increases in starting wages at large organizations and the small employee cannot match. That is a very, very interesting point. And I think it's super topical and kind of what we're talking about at this point. Chris, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that matter and matching, those increasing wages that everybody's seeing across the states.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out over time a little bit, because while people are going to have that tendency to jump towards a bigger paycheck, depending on the size of the paycheck, the question is, for the employee that's probably not thinking this all the way through at that level, is the juice worth the squeeze? Because look at what a bigger organization does. You're going to have less of a voice. You're going to deal with more red tape. There's more, like, for me, I learned that I would much rather work for a smaller organization than a big one. That's just my framework, right? So is going for a negligible hourly increase, is that going to create more problems for me than it's worth, right? The other thing too is I've seen people who make the jump into a bigger pay grade only to make less money on their paycheck because it put them in a higher tax bracket and it screwed them. So you sort of got to think these things through. So I think we'll see what happens over the course of time with that.
Right. Interesting. I would love to dive a little bit into the hidden costs of turnover, and kind of things that people don't necessarily take in consideration, whether it's their labor costs, operating overhead, whatever it is. Turnover kind of impacts all of those sectors across the board. Is there anything that organizations don't necessarily take into consideration when calculating their turnover?
Well, through my lens, it's the relationship, right? The relationships in the organization. What an organization is a big collection of people and energy and personalities, right? And so new people and different frameworks are going to create a different energy. It's really tough to measure those costs. I think generally they're looking through the lens of, the P&Ls. They're looking the cost of training and payroll, and it's a numbers thing. But yeah, I don't know that they're looking at some of the other stuff like the relationships.
That's
or
a
the
good
reputation.
Point.
It's a great point, Bo.
Yeah, I think back to the movie theater example. If you're anticipating it, but it's helping in the long run because it's not against your reputation for these people to leave, then it's not a bad place. But it was Peloton and had a big layoff here recently. I remember seeing all over LinkedIn, all the employees were very upset about it, which rightfully so. but that's would be very interested to know what that did to impact their membership numbers.
That's a point that we see reputational damage kind of coming up in a lot of our webinars on something that people don't necessarily take into account. You know, a lot of people do external marketing, right? They look towards the audience, they look towards their customers coming in to market to, but they don't necessarily care about the internal marketing within the company, going back to the aspect of culture. And, you know, when people leave your company, inevitably, right? It's really hard to make sure that they're leaving with a smile on their face and making sure that they're spreading the good word to their peers, their friends, saying they just left a really great business and they went to pursue something else, which is totally fine. But making sure that you're mitigating that is huge and something that's often overlooked, I believe.
Yeah, I think Lori brought up a great point too. The hidden cost of the additional workload or pressure on the employees that are still there.
That's a good
great
one.
point.
Yeah.
Awesome. I would love to kind of go back to the idea of incentives, right? We talked a little bit about that. So, you know, would you say that these incentives that people are offering, are they worth it that you're seeing, Chris? Is it something that is kind of exponentially growing in terms of kind of throwing money at the problem?
Well, what we see as a big focus on is making it a great place to work. I mean, that's part of why we get hired. You know, I'm not there to figure out whether to send the gift cards or whatever. That's not really
Right.
our jam. You know, how do we make this an experience that people want to be a part of? And that's actually relatively easy for us because that's our whole stuff is oriented around flow, right? What athletes call being in the zone. And anybody can get into the zone. Okay. It's driven by neurochemistry. It's available to you if you are a human being, right? So you get, and the thing about that state of consciousness is that it's what we call an autotelic experience, which is just a fancy science word for addictive because they don't like to say that in the science community. So, but people will get into flow just for the experience of being in flow. It feels amazing. Like this is, you know, you've experienced this when you were working on something, maybe it was a work or even a college term paper, when you started working and it felt like half an hour went by and then you looked up, it was like 2.5, 3 hours and you had this amazing thing and it was just incredible. That's a low level flow state, right? So, so if you can produce an experience that is just that feels so good, right? That, you know, people are not looking, you know, on taking themselves out of their Sunday afternoon because they're thinking about how Monday sucks, right? And that's, you know, people say that, oh, tomorrow's Monday, Mondays suck. Well, you're pretty much going to produce an awful week because that's your frame set, that's your mindset. Your mind will produce what you expect. It's just what the brain does. So if you can create within your organization an experience and even look at your organization as experiential. How do we improve the experience, right? Like I said, in the healthcare, we talk about patient experience outside of clinical care. But what about employee experience?
Right. I think that's really interesting. Again, it's starting from that root place. We asked a couple of poll questions throughout, one of them being, have you noticed any hidden costs of high turnover? From a couple questions back, a lot, I would say the majority, right? 93% of you say yes, definitely. A follow-up question to that is your company offering incentives? Most are saying yes. Some are saying bonuses, self-care day, which is awesome, employee referral bonuses, wellness incentives. I have a very interesting slide I'll actually pull up right here that kind of goes into how people are retaining workers these days. 44% are actually using a flexible scheduling method, which I'm seeing some people are also offering here. Bo, can you speak a little bit more on this, on, you know, the power of, kind of as Chris was saying, even implementing that stronger sense of culture through that shared experience of even things like using a shared schedule or something like that?
Yeah, I think, you know, again, you have to know your population and who you're working with. The flexible schedules, I think, work really well when your employees, they have a lot of things going on in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
If you're family people and have kids and, need the flexibility to help with that, working from home or flexible scheduling, that's going to be a big benefit to your employee base. Part of flexibility isn't just, setting a consistent schedule and, that has random hours and then sticking to it. It's about, if I'm supposed to work tomorrow, but my kid's now sick, can I offer that up? I don't have to, negatively influence my relationship with my boss. But I could find someone to replace me really easy. Part of that is a supportive culture. Part of that is just enabling people to solve their own problems and, creating a culture that puts life back into work.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Kind of going more into the best practices when it comes to stopping employee turnover. Many say that the onboarding process is key to employee retention, and we kind of talked about this. How would you implement this? How would you implement a stronger hiring process or onboarding process, Chris?
Well, you hire for personality and fit, energy, personality, call it culture, right? You hire for culture long before you hire for pedigree.
Right.
My favorite, a really great phrase that somebody said to me, and I'm going to use a word here, so just be prepared. It says, look, I can teach you the widgets. I can teach you how to do the job. I can teach you about our organization and how to do the work and whatever. What I can't teach you is how not to be an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I thought that was really true. And so you've got to understand who somebody is before you figure out if they can do what you need them to do, right? It's sort of like Simon Sinek, start with why. You can tell me all day what you do and the thing you make or whatever. I don't care. I want to know why you do it, right? So yeah.
Now, does this start with the interview process and something like questions that HR might ask the potential employee? What do you suggest there?
If I overlay my experience with my framework,
Mm-hmm.
HR people aren't typically very good at this. Unless they have some real training in some deeper psychology, they understand. I mean, really, somebody that could hire somebody really well, has a really strong intuition, reads between the lines, probably has a background in psychology and probably some other science, whether it's neurobiology or something like that, because you need to understand. Oh, and there's some natural aptitudes here in terms of pattern recognition and understanding how things are like other things. Because, pattern recognition is kind of my natural aptitude. It's my jam. If you tell me 3 stories, I'm going to get a very good idea of how your brain works and just what your whole emotional arc, your psychological parabola, call it. I'm going to know exactly what that looks like. I can tell if you're in a victim mentality. I can tell if you I know these things. So hiring somebody, getting somebody who's doing the hiring process, that is just doing more than making sure this person is qualified, is going to become more and more essential as to prevent this kind of thing.
I found a really interesting statistic that stated organizations with a strong onboarding process retain 91% of their first year workers, which is massive, right? And that's for hourly workforces. I think that's very telling. And Chris, we kind of talked a little bit about some communication aspects. So what are some retention-based communication strategies that managers can implement?
Again, I'm going to run it through the lens of accountability. If you want to get the information that from somebody, the best way to have somebody show up authentically is to show up authentically, right? When you show up with authenticity and vulnerability, you grant permission to everybody else in the room to do the same, right? So I think bosses need to, anybody in a leadership position needs to be able to say, yeah, you know what, I was wrong about that. Screwed that one up. I did not handle that as well as I could have, right? Because now here's the key, and I don't know if you've heard nothing else, maybe this is the thing to hear from me anyway, is the big roadblocks. Remember, I said, neuroscience, feelings drive actions, period, always, end of story. I don't deal in many absolutes. That's one of them. if you can remove the feelings that are driving the actions that are causing the issue, then you are going to be way ahead of the game. And I'll tell you what those feelings are, because there's really only 5. Okay. When we talk about feelings: mad, sad, glad, fear, shame. That's it. Right. A feeling is an experience, and it's going to fall in one of or a combination of those 5 categories. If you can, from your teams, from in your organization, if you can remove fear and shame, you will get everything you need in terms of information. You will get everything you need in terms of performance. You remove fear and shame from the organization, you'll move mountains.
I love that.
Not only that, but you're doing a huge personal benefit to your staff.
Right. Right. You know, for those who might be hesitant to maybe invest the time, the money, in such a subjective strategy like communication practices tend to be, what would you say to them?
You're crazy.
Right.
I mean, really, you know, for us, I mean, we're a no-brainer. If I'm not providing a 10-to-1 ROI, I screwed up somewhere, really. So it's about understanding, you know, what kind of training does your organization need? What does communication look like? Do you need, you know, specifically nonviolent communication? Is it like, what is it you need? Do you even know what you need? How do you learn what you need? Right.
Bo, you know, what are some ways that technology has kind of had a part in communication practices like these?
Yeah, I think technology helps you in that process of learning what you need. I think it's easy to follow intuition and assume that like you have a certain problem. Let's call it turnover, since that's you know, the topic of the webinar. But without the data or the understanding that technology could provide, you know, you may just be grasping at straws. Whereas, you know, when you actually get down to understanding what your problem is, that's when you can find solutions.
Got it.
But if you are just out there trying to pick up air, you know, it's never gonna fully be what you want.
Right. Chris, we talked a little bit about, you know, the idea of starting from the root of the problem and the root of training and making sure that you kind of have that wherewithal with your staff. And from the very beginning, from the onboarding process, if you, let's say theoretically, we have our audience implementing all these practices, could they guarantee job satisfaction at the end of the day? Kind of where does that come into play?
I mean, guarantee is a difficult word, right? Because some people, I worked for this guy when I was like 19. He said, you know, that person wouldn't be happy if you hung them with a brand new rope. That was a very strange thing. So, but you know, it's just, he was very strange.
Right.
But there are some people that will just never be happy, right? They're just committed to their misery, right? So no, I cannot guarantee you will feel fulfilled and satisfied, right?
Right.
That's, and again, through the lens of accountability, whose job is it to make you happy? It's yours. It's nobody else's job to make you satisfied so that you feel fulfilled. So that, like, this is on you. Right? So, you know, that's, and to put that on somebody, you know, oh, I'm, you know, look at romantic part. I'm looking for somebody to make me happy. Oh dear God, I pray for that person, you know,
Right.
It's not their job. It's not their job to make your life what you want it to be.
Of course. But I don't know if you had any thoughts on the matter.
No, I liked that one a lot.
Yeah.
It is definitely on the individual. We can, you know, set up a culture that doesn't negatively impact your, you know, path to success there. Because the answer may be for them to find happiness is, you know, to leave your job. So definitely make sure that you're setting up a culture that allows them to find that happiness, but it is ultimately on them. And, you know, you may not be able to impact that with everyone.
Right.
Definitely.
I mean, there are things you can do to support it, right? You know, don't text your staff at 8:00 at night, right? You know, I mean, you know, Bo was talking about the technology, right? And there are how many ways to get a hold of, your staff, Slack and text and email and whatever. And, streamlining those kinds of communications, because it can be it's just an assault on the senses. It's the road to burnout. And again, in burnout, it's going to make people bail, right? I tell people this infernal device is for my convenience, not yours. Right.
Right. I would love to go more into the solutions aspect, kind of closing this out on how to stop employee turnover. Chris, I'll start with you. What insight can managers expect from employee feedback that they might not have considered when initially implementing it?
What factors when implementing employee feedback?
Mm-hmm. So getting that direct feedback, whether it's after shifts, whether it's an exit interview, anything like that. Like, what are some hidden benefits, I guess you can say, that that companies reap when getting that feedback?
Yeah, I think people will ultimately tell you everything you need to know. You give them 20 minutes in safe space, they'll tell you everything. And so being open to the feedback, because, like, this is the way we've always done it, is the number one reason to stop doing it that way, in my opinion. So take nothing personal. We'll get Don Miguel Ruiz here, right? 4 Agreements. If you haven't read that, read that. But one of them is take nothing personally, right? It's understanding when somebody provides you feedback, it's understanding, this is a window into who that person is. And what they're telling you isn't about your organization. It's about how they experience your organization. This is about them. I see this a lot, in like romantic partnerships. Something as simple as saying, something like, "Hey, Bo, you look really handsome today." Who is that about?
That's about me.
No.
No.
That is about me. This is me sharing with Bo my thoughts, my world, my reality with Bo. So if somebody can come up and say, "Chris, you're the best person in the world," I can put "I think" on the front of that sentence. This is their reality. If somebody comes up and says, "Hey, Chris, you're the biggest jerk I've ever met," same thing. I can say thank you. Thank you when they say, "Chris, you're the best person ever." I can say thank you when they say you're a jerk. Why? Thank you for sharing with me your perspective, your reality, your inner world.
Got it. Interesting. I think that's,
so
definitely.
Now, as the person who's receiving the feedback, you're getting an idea of who you brought into the organization and how they experience your organization. Because remember, there's like 2 brands. You have the brand according to your customer. Brand is how your customer experiences you. And then you have the brand according to your employee. This is how your employee experiences you. Those might be 2 very different things.
Interesting. Bo, I'd love to kind of flip the question towards you. Why is employee feedback so important? And even tying it into kind of the idea of culture that we discussed earlier.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm not sure if I'm looking cute today or not anymore. But
all the HR people are like, "Oh, harassment." I
think, again, in order for you to address the problems, you have to have the truth of the problems. And once you do get that point of truth, building those safe spaces or building that opportunity to understand your organization, it can be a difficult hill. And when you get to that point, if you don't address them, then you only have yourself to blame for that negative culture,
right,
or difficulties that you're experiencing. But if you do have the opportunity and can build up that trust, then act on it. Like, let's be proactive. Let's implement a good culture that, to Chris's point, isn't desperate and is one that people want to be a part of.
Jody had a really good comment at the end of that. Said it goes back to the pulse of the organization, and your employees are that pulse. So again, that driving factor is really crucial. I think that's a really good point, Jody. Thank you. Bo, I have another kind of follow-up question to that. We talk a little bit about the idea of doing the inner work from managers and then managers to employees on the training aspect. What can you tell me about, when it comes to scheduling and scheduling based on qualitative metrics, such as, managers' knowledge of employee preference, whether they want, the morning hours, whether they want to work with a certain coworker. How is retention kind of wrapped up in all of this?
Retention is wrapped up in all of this. Yeah, that's a tough one, I think.
Mm-hmm. In the sense of, talking a little bit about like the idea of making sure you're catering a little more to the employee and kind of what they prefer, making sure that they have a say in those flexible schedules.
Yeah. I think it comes down to then, understanding your people. And if you are just throwing money at the wall or throwing money at the problem without understanding what the problem is or who the people, how to solve their dilemmas, then, you're kind of just wasting your effort and wasting your resources. But
Right.
if you have that knowledge and do know that flexibility is something that, you're lacking, but your competitors for your employees do have, then,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to know that pretty quickly as you start to analyze it.
Definitely. That's great. I would love kind of a quick closing statement from each of you. Chris, we'll start with you first. What are, one or two takeaways that our audience can leave this webinar with and how to stop employee turnover of their staff?
I think the number one thing is recognizing that employee turnover is not your problem. It's the result of your problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what you need to understand before you do anything. The other thing that I would say is that if you are throwing money at something, throw it into training, because even if it doesn't solve that problem, you're still going to get benefit. It's not wasted.
Right. Right. That's great. Bo, what about you?
Yeah, again, I would fall back on understanding your people, getting the resources and drivers of opportunity to understand that, and do it on a large scale, collect that information, and try and address what the actual problem is.
That's great. That's great. And Jody had a really awesome closing statement. In the end, employees have opinions and want to be heard. If they feel heard, that can create a positive work culture. Could not have said it better myself. Thank you again to everybody that participated. Chris, thank you so much for coming on. Bo, same to you. I really appreciate it. Before everybody goes, we do have a turnover audit, again, just to help gauge your organization's level of turnover and how they mitigate it. So feel free to take that. And until the next webinar, again, thank you both for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you guys. All right. We'll see everyone at the next one. Have a good one.